Welcome to Recaply X, your movie recap in a flash. We bring the drama, the action, and the twists. In minutes, the story begins with an experiment to launch a rocket into space. Inside the rocket is a small spacecraft filled with some items, a picture of humans, a map showing Earth's location in the galaxy, in case aliens find it and want to communicate. Meanwhile, we meet Neil, a man hosting a big party to celebrate the success of his book, which has sold impressively. His neighbor Catherine is at the party, introducing him to people and showing him off. Suddenly, a group of dogs attacks the party, flipping tables. But then, Neil wakes up. It was all a dream. The doorbell rings, and it's his neighbor standing there angrily, complaining about his dog causing trouble. Neil takes his dog, Dennis, and goes for a walk as if nothing happened. While walking, he bumps into Catherine and starts telling her about his dream, trying to express his feelings for her in a way that comes off as awkward. At the same time, the spacecraft launched earlier reaches the aliens. They see the human message and laugh, tossing it into a pile of meaningless messages from other planets. After their laughter, they decide to destroy Earth. However, one of them suggests giving humans a second chance. As per galactic law, they agree to randomly choose one person on Earth and grant him superpowers to see how they use them. If that person misuses the powers, the planet will be destroyed. The chosen one? Neil, of course. At that moment, Neil is heading to school with his bike, as usual, and he ends up falling and breaking it. Before he can gather himself, he's hit by some alien energy, unknowingly gaining superpowers. Elsewhere, Catherine is sitting with her friend Rosie at a cafe, complaining about her bad luck with men, and mentioning how Neil is a nice guy, but acts strangely at times. Neil arrives at school, where his principal scolds him for being late. He enters the classroom to find the students acting wild, so he decides to leave until the lesson is over. During the break, he meets his friend Ray, who has a crush on a girl who doesn't like him back. Ray asks Neil, "If you could wish for one thing, what would it be?" Jokingly, Neil says, "I wish the aliens would blow up the classroom with the students inside." As he laughs, a sudden explosion occurs, and the classroom is actually blown up. Neil stands there in shock, realizing he might really have superpowers. He rushes to the classroom and finds it completely destroyed. Stunned, he goes home and turns on the TV, which reports that 38 people died in the explosion. Neil starts to connect the dots, wondering if he's responsible. He decides to test his powers by wishing for the ground to be clean of his dog Dennis's mess. To his shock, the ground instantly becomes spotless. Scared, he runs to the kitchen for a drink to calm himself. He accidentally drops a juice bottle into the sink and wishes for the juice to return to the bottle. At first, nothing happens, but when he repeats the wish and waves his hand, the juice comes back, though it's mixed with food scraps from the sink. Frustrated, he wishes for a new bottle, and suddenly the bottle moves on its own, leaves the house, and heads to the supermarket. Neil and Dennis chase after it, but can't catch up. The bottle smashes into the supermarket, breaking the doors and setting off alarms. Neil panics and wishes to be back home, and he instantly teleports there with Dennis. Now realizing he can grant wishes, Neil decides to undo the damage he caused. He wishes for everyone who died in the explosion to come back to life. Suddenly, the dead rise, including those in morgues and graves, turning into zombies. Horrified, Neil wishes to correct his mistake. Wishing the explosion had never happened, time rewinds, and he finds himself back at school, with everything normal again. Neil starts experimenting with his powers. He wishes for the students to be eager to learn, and they all suddenly sit quietly, focused on their studies. After class, he wishes for his principal to treat him kindly, and the principal praises him as an excellent teacher. Feeling invincible, Neil wishes for his friend Ray's crush, Dorsey, to fall madly in love with Ray. Dorsey immediately confesses her love to Ray, leaving Neil impressed with his abilities. Neil continues using his powers, wishing to become the president of the United States. Suddenly, a presidential car arrives, and he's whisked away for protection from supposed terrorists. Scared, Neil wishes to return to his normal life, and he finds himself back home, safe and sound. He then wishes to see Catherine, and the floor of his apartment disappears, giving him a direct view of her below. She screams in confusion, and Neil quickly wishes for everything to go back to normal. The next day, Neil tells Ray about his powers, but Ray doesn't believe him. To prove it, Neil makes a skeleton in the school lab come to life and Taylor talk. Still skeptical, Ray challenges Neil to make the skeleton jump out the window. The skeleton jumps and lands on the principal, who is walking below. Furious, the principal storms into the office to scold Ray, but when he sees Neil, his demeanor changes completely. He gives Neil the day off and offers to cover his classes himself. Ray starts to suspect something strange is going on. Meanwhile, Catherine is leaving work when she runs into her ex-boyfriend Grant, who's trying to win her back. He shows off his new car and proposes to her, but Catherine firmly tells him she doesn't love him and doesn't want to continue their relationship. Despite this, Grant gives her the keys to an apartment he bought for them, hoping to change her mind. He kept telling her, "Look at him before you judge." That night, Catherine was sitting with her friend Rosie, telling her about Grant and his strange behavior. Rosie approached her from another angle and said, "Didn't I tell you that your neighbor Neil is nice and that you liked him? Why don't you try talking to him?" Rosie managed to convince Catherine to go and ask Neil herself if he liked her or not. Meanwhile, Neil was lying in bed, trying to convince himself, "I wish Catherine loved me madly." But unfortunately for him, the powerful alien device had a malfunction at that moment, so his wish didn't work. Catherine actually went to him, not because of the magical power, but because she genuinely became interested in him. She knocked on his door, and as soon as he opened, she straightforwardly asked, "Do you really like me?" Neil got a bit nervous and replied, "I've liked you for a long time." The next day, the device was fixed, and Neil recharged it with magical power again. Neil was flying with joy, thinking, "She must have loved me because of my wish." He didn't realize that she had come to him willingly. He received a note from Catherine saying she had to leave early for work. Neil quickly got dressed, called out to his dog Dennis to get ready, and decided to have breakfast elsewhere. While he was getting ready, Dennis the dog kept barking and jumping around him. Neil couldn't figure out what Dennis wanted, so he had a brilliant idea. Why not make him talk like humans? And indeed, Dennis started talking. They sat and talked to each other normally until the doorbell rang. Neil quickly told his dog, "Stay here and don't say a word." He opened the door to find Catherine, who was very happy about what happened between them the day before. She told him, "I've liked you for a long time." While they were talking, suddenly Dennis's voice came from the kitchen, saying, "I love you, Neil." Catherine froze in shock, assuming that Neil might have feelings for men instead of her. She left and ran away. Neil ran after her, saw her getting on a bus, and wished he could be with her. He mistakenly wished to be above the bus and found himself on the roof. Then he wished to be inside the bus, but ended up in the engine. Finally, he wished to be with the passengers, but by then, Catherine had already gotten off. She kept walking away, unwilling to listen to his explanations. Later, Catherine returned to her apartment, only to find Grant waiting for her inside. They started arguing loudly, so much so that all the neighbors, including Neil, heard them. Neil rushed to her and said, "Come stay at my place until this man leaves." She agreed and went with him. Neil explained everything to her and told her that he could fulfill any wish. To prove his point, he wished for her to get a promotion and a big office at work. But Catherine didn't believe him and thought he was joking. While they were talking, suddenly Grant jumped in through the window, pointed a gun at Neil, and demanded he fulfill his wishes. Neil wished for the gun to fall from Grant's hand, and it did. The situation escalated into a fight between Neil and Grant, and Catherine had had enough. She grabbed the gun, threw it out the window, and told them both, "You're both crazy." She left them to sort things out. Neil started using his wishes on Grant, making him feel pain, sticking him to the ceiling, and burying his head in the plants. Finally, Neil warned him, "If you go near Catherine again, I'll turn you into something unrecognizable." While they were standing there, Dennis the dog started barking and talking. Neil told him to shut up, but Grant took advantage of the distraction and hit Neil hard on the head. Neil woke up tied up, with Grant standing over him, threatening to kill the dog if Neil didn't comply. Grant handed Neil a long list of wishes and forced him to fulfill them one by one. The first wish was for an enormous amount of gold to appear around him. Meanwhile, Catherine was at work and discovered that she had indeed been promoted and given a big office. At that moment, she believed Neil had been truthful. She rushed to Neil's house to thank him, but when she arrived, she found the door open and the place in disarray, with broken glass and fallen plants. She searched the apartment and suddenly heard a sound coming from the closet. She opened it to find Ray hiding inside with Doris, who was still a dog. Ray explained that he had come to Neil to reverse the wish that turned Doris into a dog, but unfortunately, Neil wasn't there. Using her wit, Catherine deduced that Grant had kidnapped Neil and suggested they check the apartment that Grant had forced Neil to buy for him. They went there with the spare key and found Grant still forcing Neil to fulfill his wishes. Catherine tried to stop him, but Grant got angry and demanded that Neil wish for Catherine to love him. Neil reluctantly complied, but used the opportunity to free himself from the ropes and cancel all the wishes he had granted for Grant. He also freed Dennis. In the end, Neil turned Grant into a small dog. Before leaving, Ray asked Neil to reverse the wish that had turned Doris into a dog, even if it meant she would hate him again. Neil agreed, and Doris returned to her human form. Still disliking Ray, Neil was left alone. The next day, Neil went to Catherine to apologize for everything, but she had already made up her mind. She told him, "You're selfish. I don't know if I loved you willingly or because of a wish." She cut him off and said, "I don't want to see you again," and walked away. Neil returned home, devastated, realizing he had misused the power he had. Instead of solving the world's problems, he had focused on his trivial personal issues. Determined to make things right, he started wishing for no hunger in the world, for everyone to have food, for no homelessness, no wars, and for global warming to disappear. However, as usual, the results were disastrous. He saw on the news that China was suffering from overeating. The world had no empty spaces because everyone now had housing. Wars were still ongoing but without reasons, and the earth had turned into a block of ice. Neil realized he had made things worse and decided to undo all the wishes he had made. After that, he planned to end his life and threw himself into a fire, but Dennis the dog ran after him and jumped in with him. Neil rushed to save Dennis, failing even at ending his own life. At that moment, the 10 days given to him by the aliens were up. They concluded that Neil had failed to do any good and decided to destroy Earth, but Dennis suggested they give him the power instead. Neil agreed, and as soon as Dennis received the power, he said, "This power is a curse, not a gift," and wished for the source of the power to be destroyed. The laser that was about to destroy Earth turned back on the aliens and destroyed them instead. Neil was sent back in time to one day before he received the power, but he remembered everything that had happened. He rushed to Catherine and invited her to dinner, and she agreed. Neil felt he had achieved his true wish. Dennis told him he wanted to remain a dog forever, so he could always be Neil's best companion. The movie ends. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to get more new videos.